The Phantom Jackal of Shadow Hollow. In the small, desolate village of Shadow Hollow, tales of a phantom jackal had long haunted the locals. This was no ordinary animal, it was said to be a spectral creature, cursed to roam the earth under the light of the full moon. Legend had it that many years ago, a greedy poacher named Koresh had hunted a pack of jackals to near extinction in the nearby forest. Among them was a mysterious black-furred jackal, larger and fiercer than the rest. The villagers believed it was the guardian of the forest. When Koresh killed it for its pelt, a curse was unleashed, binding its spirit to the world of the living. The cursed jackal now prowled the village under the cover of night. Its glowing red eyes pierced through the darkness, and its eerie, unearthly howl sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to listen. The creature seemed to thrive on fear, targeting those who strayed too far from home after sunset. Locals spoke of strange encounters, a lone traveler stumbling upon the beast, its eyes locking with theirs, freezing them in place as a wave of dread overcame them. Some said the jackal would circle its victims, its growl low and menacing, before vanishing into thin air. Others claimed it could pass through walls, appearing in homes to terrify families. One fateful night, a skeptic named Ramesh decided to uncover the truth. Armed with a lantern and a hunting knife, he ventured into the forest. Hours passed, and the villagers heard nothing. Then, as the clock struck midnight, an unearthly howl echoed through the village. Ramesh was found the next morning at the edge of the forest, trembling and pale. He spoke of being surrounded by the spectral jackal and its glowing pack. Though unharmed, the encounter had left him shaken, his confidence shattered. To this day, the phantom jackal continues to haunt Shadow Hollow, a reminder of nature's wrath and the price of human greed. On moonlit nights, the villagers stay indoors, bolting their doors and windows, for they know the guardian of the forest is still watching. Let me know if you'd like any modifications. The Witches of Shadow Hollow. Ramesh's terrifying encounter with the phantom jackal was only the beginning. As the villagers huddled in their homes, whispers began to spread about two mysterious figures seen wandering near the forest's edge. These were not ordinary women. They were witches, Mala and Nira, sisters with a sinister connection to the jackal's curse. Decades ago, Mala and Nira were outcasts, feared for their strange rituals and knowledge of dark magic. They had lived on the outskirts of Shadow Hollow, performing forbidden spells in the dead of night. When the villagers discovered their practices, they drove the sisters away, believing they had perished in the deep forest. But the truth was far darker. The sisters had forged a bond with the spirit of the black-furred jackal. When the poacher Koresh slaughtered the sacred beast, its vengeful spirit turned to Mala and Nira, granting them immortality in exchange for their loyalty. Now, the witches acted as guardians of the cursed jackal, using their powers to ensure no one disturbed its haunt. One night, as the full moon bathed the village in a ghostly light, the witches revealed themselves. They appeared at the edge of the forest, cloaked in black, their faces pale and eyes glowing green. They moved in unison, their whispers carrying on the wind like a dark lullaby. The villagers, terrified but desperate, sent their bravest men to confront the sisters. Among them was Ramesh, still shaken but determined to redeem himself. Armed with silver amulets and torches, the group ventured into the forest, following the witches' haunting laughter. Deep in the woods, the men stumbled upon an ancient clearing where Mala and Nira stood beside the spectral jackal. The witches raised their hands, and a violent gust of wind extinguished the torches. The jackal growled, its red eyes burning brighter. Mala spoke, her voice cold and echoing. "You hunted what was sacred. Now, the forest hunts you." As the men stood frozen, Nira chanted a spell, and shadowy figures began to emerge from the trees, ghostly jackals, their howls merging into a terrifying cacophony. Ramesh, clutching his silver amulet, shouted, "We mean no harm. Tell us how to end this curse." The witches paused, their expressions unreadable. Mala pointed to an ancient tree, its bark carved with glowing runes. "Return what was taken. Bury the black pelt beneath the guardian's tree, and leave this forest forever." The men fled the clearing, determined to follow the witch's instructions. But as they left, the sisters exchanged a knowing smile. For them, the curse was not a tragedy but a testament to their power, a reminder that Shadow Hollow would forever belong to them and their spectral jackal. Terror of the witches. The villagers of Shadow Hollow thought the ordeal would end after they returned the black jackal's pelt to the guardian's tree. For a brief time, the eerie howls faded, and the witches vanished. But peace in Shadow Hollow was never meant to last. Months later, under a blood-red moon, Mala and Nira returned, more powerful and vengeful than ever. The witches had absorbed the energy of the spectral jackal, transforming into monstrous versions of themselves. Their eyes glowed like emerald fire, their voices echoed like thunder, and their laughter sent chills down spines. They no longer relied on the jackal alone. Now, they commanded the shadows themselves, twisting the very forest into a living nightmare. The witch's wrath was unleashed on the village. Crops withered overnight, wells dried up, and livestock vanished without a trace. At night, ghostly flames danced around the homes, and villagers heard whispers through the walls, threats and taunts that no one dared respond to. One by one, the bravest of Shadow Hollow disappeared, lured into the forest by the witch's illusions. Some claimed to see the faces of lost loved ones, while others followed voices calling their names. None returned. Desperate, the villagers sought answers from the village elder, an ancient woman named Devi, who had lived through the witch's first reign of terror. She revealed a chilling truth. Mala and Nira cannot be defeated by force. Their power comes from the curse itself, and as long as fear controls us, they will grow stronger. Devi told the villagers of a forbidden ritual, one that could sever the witch's connection to the spectral jackal. The ritual required courage and unity, traits that terrified villagers struggled to muster. Still, they had no choice but to try. As the blood moon reached its peak, Devi led a group of villagers deep into the forest, carrying torches and sacred symbols. They arrived at the guardian's tree, now twisted and blackened, its roots pulsating with dark energy. The witches appeared, their forms shifting between human and monstrous. "You dare challenge us?" Nira hissed, her voice like venom. Mala raised her hands, summoning a storm of black wind that extinguished the torches. "This forest is ours. You will kneel before us or perish." But this time, the villagers did not run. Following Devi's lead, they stood together and began chanting the ancient incantation. The air grew heavy, and the witches screamed, their forms flickering like dying flames. "You think you can break our bond?" Mala shrieked, her voice shaking the ground. The spectral jackal appeared, its red eyes blazing with fury. It charged at the villagers, but Devi stepped forward, holding up a glowing talisman. The jackal stopped, its growl fading into a mournful whimper. "Your time is over," Devi declared, her voice steady. The ritual reached its climax as a blinding light engulfed the clearing. The witches screamed in agony, their forms dissolving into the wind. The jackal let out one final howl before fading into the shadows. When the light faded, the guardian's tree stood restored, its bark smooth and unmarked. The forest was silent, and the air felt lighter. Shadow Hollow was finally free from the witch's terror, or so they hoped. For as the villagers left the forest, a faint whisper lingered in the air. "This is not the end." The return of the shadows. Years passed after the witches were seemingly destroyed. Shadow Hollow began to rebuild, and the villagers believed the nightmare was finally over. The forest became quieter, the air lighter, and the cursed stories faded into legend. But legends, as the villagers would soon learn, never truly die. On the night of a rare lunar eclipse, strange phenomena began anew. The moon turned an ominous shade of black, and an unnatural fog rolled into the village, swallowing the streets. Shadows moved unnaturally, stretching and twisting even where no light existed. Something ancient and far darker than the witches was awakening. One of the village children, Arjun, wandered too close to the forest during the eclipse. He returned at dawn, but he was different. His eyes were dull, his voice distant, and he muttered strange phrases about the sisters reborn. Soon after, others began reporting strange visions, Mala and Nira appearing in mirrors, their faces pale and eyes hollow. Devi, the elder who had once helped banish the witches, sensed the shift in the air. She called a meeting of the villagers and spoke grimly. "The witches were not destroyed. Their spirits have merged with the forest itself. They are no longer bound to their forms. They are everywhere, and their power is far greater." This time, the witches' influence was no longer limited to the forest. They used the fog as a gateway, entering the village in formless shadows. Crops once again withered, but worse, the villagers themselves began to change. Some fell into trances, wandering aimlessly toward the woods and disappearing. Others became violent, their eyes glowing faintly green, as though possessed. Devi sought answers in the ruins of the guardian's tree. What she found there chilled her to the core. The tree's roots were alive, pulsating with dark energy, and in its center was a hollow where two glowing orbs rested. These were the witches' hearts, preserved by the curse and now stronger than ever. To destroy them once and for all, Devi realized, someone would have to sever their connection to the forest entirely. But this would require an act of unparalleled bravery, Someone would need to venture deep into the heart of the cursed forest, confront the witch's spirits, and destroy their hearts before the eclipse ended. A small group of villagers volunteered, led by Arjun's older sister, Leela. Leela was fearless and determined to save her brother. Armed with sacred relics and the elders' guidance, they entered the forest, navigating its shifting paths and whispering shadows. Inside, the forest seemed alive. Branches reached out like claws, and the air was thick with whispers. The group was plagued by illusions, visions of their worst fears and lost loved ones begging them to turn back. When they finally reached the heart of the forest, they found a massive clearing where the witch's spirits awaited. Mala and Neera had become grotesque, shadowy forms, their features warped and monstrous. "You cannot defeat us," they hissed in unison. "We are the forest, and the forest is eternal." Leela stepped forward, clutching a sacred dagger blessed by Devi. "You are nothing but echoes of your own greed," she shouted. As the group began chanting the ritual to sever the witch's connection to the forest, the witches unleashed their full power. The shadows came alive, pulling at the villagers, trying to silence them. The clearing shook, the ground splitting open as dark energy poured out. In a desperate act, Leela charged forward, dodging the shadows and plunging the dagger into the glowing orbs at the center of the tree. A deafening scream erupted from the witches as their forms shattered into a million fragments of light. The forest fell silent, the fog lifted, the air grew warm, and the moon returned to its natural glow. The guardian's tree crumbled to ash, and the villagers knew the witch's reign was finally over. Or was it? As the villagers returned to Shadow Hollow, Leela noticed something strange, a small, black sapling growing where the guardian's tree once stood. Its leaves shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and for a moment, she thought she heard a whisper on the wind. "We will rise again." The haunting of Shadow Hollow. The destruction of the guardian's tree should have brought peace to Shadow Hollow, but the discovery of the black sapling unsettled Leela. Despite her fears, the villagers celebrated their supposed victory, believing the witches were gone for good. However, their joy was short-lived. Within weeks, strange occurrences returned, this time, far more terrifying. Shadows no longer whispered, they screamed. Villagers reported seeing glowing, spectral figures roaming the streets at night. These were not just spirits of Mala and Neera, but dozens of other ghostly forms, each with hollow eyes and mouths twisted in eternal screams. Devi, the village elder, explained the horrifying truth. The witch's curse has fractured. Their destruction has unleashed all the trapped souls of the forest, victims of the witches, the spectral jackal, and even those who disappeared long ago. They are lost, angry, and bound to Shadow Hollow. That night, the village was thrown into chaos. The ghosts began to manifest in terrifying ways. Doors slammed open, cold winds howled through homes, and villagers woke to find spectral faces hovering inches from theirs. Fires erupted spontaneously, only to vanish without a trace. Worst of all, the ghosts seemed drawn to the black sapling, their forms circling it like moths to a flame. Leela, haunted by her role in destroying the guardian's tree, gathered a group of villagers to confront the rising threat. This time, the task was not to fight the witches but to lay the spirits to rest. Devi provided guidance. The sapling is the heart of their unrest. If it grows, it will become a new guardian's tree, corrupted by the witch's dark magic. You must destroy it before it takes root, but beware, the ghosts will do everything to protect it. Armed with sacred symbols, salt, and iron weapons, the group approached the sapling under a blood-red sky. As they drew closer, the air grew icy, and the ghosts materialized in their path. These were not the wispy, faint apparitions of legends, they were fully formed phantoms, their translucent faces twisted with rage. The group fought to advance, using salt to create barriers and iron to disperse the spirits temporarily. But for every ghost they repelled, more emerged, their numbers growing as the sapling's roots spread deeper into the cursed soil. At the sapling's base, Leela found herself face to face with the spirits of Mala and Neera, now even more monstrous. The witches spoke through the voices of the ghosts, their words echoing like 100 voices at once. "You cannot stop us. This land belongs to the dead." Leela raised the sacred dagger once more, but before she could strike, the sapling's roots lashed out like living tentacles, pulling her to the ground. As the ghosts closed in, she remembered Devi's words. "The spirits are bound by pain. You must offer them peace, not destruction." Summoning all her courage, Leela spoke to the ghosts, her voice trembling but resolute. "You are free. The witches no longer control you. Leave this place and find peace." For a moment, the ghosts hesitated, their forms flickering. But Mala and Neera's spirits roared, their power surging as they tried to regain control. Leela grabbed a vial of sacred water and poured it over the sapling, chanting an ancient prayer Devi had taught her. A brilliant light erupted from the sapling, engulfing the clearing. The ghosts screamed, their forms dissolving into the light. The sapling withered, its roots turning to ash. As the light faded, the forest grew silent once more. Leela collapsed, exhausted but relieved. The ghosts were gone, their souls finally freed. The black sapling had been destroyed, and the witch's curse was broken, for now. But as she stood, she noticed something chilling. Deep in the forest, another sapling had begun to grow, its faint glow barely visible through the trees. Shadow Hollow was safe for the moment, but the battle between the living and the dead was far from over. The final end of the haunting. Shadow Hollow had become a battleground between the living and the dead. Though the black sapling had been destroyed, the forest remained cursed. Each night, the ghosts returned stronger, terrorizing the villagers with greater malice. They no longer stopped at whispering or fleeting apparitions. Now, they slammed doors, shattered windows, and even dragged villagers from their homes. Crops burned under spectral flames, livestock disappeared into the fog, and the once thriving village was on the brink of collapse. Desperate, the villagers turned to Devi for a solution, but even the elders seemed unsure. The ghosts are not like the witches, she explained. They are not bound by greed or ambition. They are fueled by anguish, confusion, and rage. To end their torment, we must find the root cause of their pain. Devi shared an ancient legend about the forest itself. Long before the witches arrived, the land had been sacred, guarded by a spirit of balance. When the witches corrupted the forest, that spirit was shattered, its pieces scattered. To truly end the curse, the villagers would need to restore the spirit, healing the land and granting the ghosts peace. The plan. The villagers prepared for the most dangerous journey yet. Devi identified 3 sacred relics scattered across the forest, fragments of the guardian spirit's essence. These relics were hidden in places overrun by the most vengeful ghosts. Collecting them would require bravery, unity, and unwavering determination. Leela, still recovering from her previous ordeal, volunteered to lead the effort. She was joined by a small group of the village's strongest and most courageous individuals. Armed with sacred symbols, salt, iron weapons, and Devi's guidance, they ventured into the cursed forest. The journey. 1. The Cave of Echoes. The first relic was hidden in a dark cave where the ghosts' screams echoed endlessly. As the group entered, they were bombarded by illusions of their worst fears. One villager nearly turned back after seeing his deceased wife pleading with him to join her. Leela reminded them of the truth. These are lies. Stay focused. After battling shadowy forms and navigating the twisting tunnels, they found the relic, a glowing crystal embedded in the cave wall. 2. The Lake of Stillness. The second relic lay beneath a cursed lake, its surface eerily still despite the wind. Ghostly, hands reached out from the water, pulling anyone who got too close. Leela and her team used ropes and iron-tipped poles to retrieve the relic, a shard of silver light resting at the bottom. The lake erupted in a storm of wailing spirits, but the villagers held their ground, using salt to create a barrier until the storm subsided. 3. The Shadowed Clearing. The final relic was guarded by the witches themselves, or rather, what remained of their spirits. Mala and Neera's forms were barely recognizable, twisted into monstrous, shadowy beasts. They taunted Leela, trying to break her resolve. "You think you can undo what we've built?" they hissed. But Leela refused to give in, using the sacred dagger to weaken their hold on the clearing. The final relic, a glowing orb, was recovered as the witches' spirits faded into nothingness. The final ritual. With the 3 relics in hand, the villagers returned to the heart of the forest. Devi prepared the final ritual, instructing everyone to form a circle around the relics. As the villagers chanted, the relics began to merge, forming a blinding sphere of light. The ghosts appeared, their forms more aggressive than ever, desperate to stop the ritual. They lunged at the villagers, but the sacred light repelled them, forcing them back. The earth trembled, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the forest, the voice of the guardian spirit. "Thank you for restoring me," it said. "The balance shall be restored, and the dead shall find peace." The light expanded, engulfing the entire forest. The ghosts screamed one last time, their forms dissolving into the light. The cursed saplings withered, the fog lifted, and the forest transformed. What was once dark and twisted became lush and vibrant, filled with life once more. The end. Shadow Hollow was finally free. The villagers rebuilt their homes, planting crops in the rejuvenated soil. Though scars of the past remained, they found solace in the knowledge that the curse was broken. Leela, now regarded as a hero, often visited the forest to ensure the balance remained. And though the guardian spirit was unseen, its presence was felt in the warmth of the sun, the rustling of the trees, and the peaceful silence that now filled the once haunted land. The dead had found their peace, and Shadow Hollow had reclaimed its future. The chosen ghosts. Years after the forest was healed and peace returned to Shadow Hollow, whispers of a new darkness began to spread. This time, the threat did not come from the cursed land or restless spirits but from the villagers themselves. A strange belief had taken root among some of the villagers, fueled by tales of the witch's power and the spectral jackal. They saw the spirit world not as a curse but as a path to immortality and ultimate strength. A secret group, calling themselves the Eternals, began to form. Their goal: to transcend death and return as ghosts, free from the bounds of the living world. At first, their activities were harmless, gathering at night to chant strange incantations and perform rituals near the ruins of the Guardian's Tree. But soon, animals began to disappear, and eerie lights were seen flickering in the forest. The villagers grew uneasy, sensing a familiar darkness returning. Leela, now the village's unofficial protector, decided to investigate. She followed the flickering lights one night and discovered the Eternals in the heart of the forest. They had unearthed the ashes of the black sapling and were using its remnants in their rituals. As she watched in horror, one of them, a man named Raghav, drank from a dark, glowing vial. Moments later, Raghav collapsed, his body convulsing violently. The others chanted louder, their voices merging into an eerie harmony. Suddenly, Raghav's body stilled, and then his spirit rose. His form was translucent, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He was a ghost, but not one of pain or rage. This ghost was powerful, controlled, and fully aware of his transformation. Leela stepped out of the shadows, confronting the group. "What are you doing? Do you realize what you've unleashed?" she demanded. Raghav's ghost turned to her, his voice cold and echoing. "We are freeing ourselves. Why should we live fragile lives when we can become eternal?" The witches understood this, and now we do too. Leela tried to reason with them, warning of the dangers of tampering with such dark forces. But the Eternals had tasted power, and they would not listen. Over the following weeks, more villagers joined their cause, each undergoing the ritual and returning as ghosts. The newly formed ghostly army began to assert control over Shadow Hollow. They could pass through walls, move with unnatural speed, and manipulate the shadows. The living villagers were powerless against them. Crops were demanded as offerings, homes were haunted until their occupants fled, and the once peaceful village descended into chaos. The final stand. Desperate, Leela turned to Devi, who was now frail but still wise. "The balance has been broken again," Devi said. "But this time, it is the greed of the living that has brought ruin. The Eternals are not true ghosts, they are tethered to their remains. Destroy what binds them, and their spirits will be forced to move on." Leela rallied the remaining villagers, forming a plan to end the Eternals' reign. They gathered sacred relics, salt, and iron tools, preparing for a final battle. Under the light of a waning moon, Leela and her group infiltrated the forest, heading to the site of the Eternals' rituals. The ghosts sensed their presence and attacked, their forms flickering with power. But the villagers held their ground, using salt and iron to push them back. Leela found the source of their power, the ashes of the black sapling, stored in a ceremonial urn. As she moved toward it, Raghav appeared, his ghostly form towering above her. "You think you can stop us? We are eternal," he roared. Leela didn't waver. With the sacred dagger, she struck the urn, shattering it. The ashes scattered into the wind, and the Eternals let out a collective scream. One by one, their forms began to dissolve, their power fading. Raghav, the last to disappear, glared at Leela. "You think this is the end? There will always be those who seek eternity." As his form vanished, the forest fell silent once more. The balance had been restored, but at a cost. The villagers vowed never to tamper with the spirit world again, sealing the forest's secrets away. Epilogue. Shadow Hollow returned to peace, but the story of the Eternals became a cautionary tale passed down through generations. And though the village prospered, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone else might try to follow the same dark path. The question lingered in her mind: could humanity ever resist the allure of eternity? The haunting of Dreadwood Forest. It was supposed to be a fun adventure. A group of 5 friends, Arav, Mira, Kabir, Zara, and Rohan, decided to spend a weekend camping in Dreadwood Forest, a place infamous for its eerie tales. Despite the warnings of the locals, they dismissed the stories as mere superstitions and ventured deep into the forest, eager to prove their bravery. The first day passed uneventfully. They laughed, roasted marshmallows, and exchanged ghost stories around the campfire. But as night fell, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. The usual sounds of chirping crickets and rustling leaves disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence. As they prepared to sleep, strange things began to happen. Zara heard faint whispers calling her name, but when she turned, there was no one there. Kabir's flashlight flickered even though the batteries were new. A shadowy figure darted past their camp, too fast for anyone to see clearly. Probably an animal, Rohan said, trying to sound confident. But his shaky voice betrayed his fear. By midnight, the situation worsened. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more persistent. When Mira's tent collapsed on its own, she screamed. The group huddled together, deciding to stay by the fire until dawn. The encounter. As the firelight flickered, Arav noticed something strange, a tall, ghostly figure standing just beyond the trees. Its face was featureless, and its translucent body seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "Do you see that?" Arav whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the ghost let out a bone-chilling wail. More figures emerged from the darkness, spirits with hollow eyes and twisted forms, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. The friends panicked and ran deeper into the forest, desperate to escape. But the forest seemed alive, its paths twisting and leading them back to the same spot no matter which way they turned. The fight back. After hours of fleeing, the friends realized they couldn't outrun the ghosts. Mira, the most level-headed of the group, took charge. "We need to fight back," she said. "We can't just run forever." Kabir remembered the tales they had heard about Dreadwood Forest. "The ghosts are bound to this place because of an ancient curse," he said. "The stories said their remains are buried under the old oak tree in the heart of the forest. If we destroy the remains, they might be freed." Reluctantly, the group agreed. Using their flashlights and a rudimentary map, they made their way to the heart of the forest. The ghosts pursued them relentlessly, appearing suddenly, their wails growing louder and more desperate. At one point, Rohan was nearly pulled into the shadows, but Arav grabbed him just in time. The old oak tree. When they reached the ancient oak tree, its massive trunk twisted unnaturally, they saw a small clearing beneath its roots. A faint glow emanated from the ground. Using sticks and their bare hands, they began digging. The ghosts surrounded them, their forms growing darker and more menacing. The air became icy, and the friends struggled to keep their courage. Finally, they unearthed a box containing old bones wrapped in tattered cloth. As Kabir lifted it, the ghosts let out an ear-piercing shriek. They lunged at the group, desperate to stop them. "Burn it!" Mira shouted. Arav grabbed a bottle of lighter fluid from his bag and doused the remains. Zara lit a match and threw it onto the pile. Flames erupted, casting a warm glow against the cold darkness. The end. As the fire consumed the bones, the ghosts began to dissolve, their wails turning into soft whispers of relief. One by one, they disappeared into the night, leaving only the crackling fire and the stunned friends behind. The forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The air grew warmer, the shadows receded, and the natural sounds of the forest returned. Exhausted but relieved, the friends made their way back to their campsite. At dawn, they packed their belongings and left Dreadwood Forest, vowing never to return. Though they had survived, the experience left a mark on them. They never spoke of the night again, but they would always remember the haunting of Dreadwood Forest, and the courage it took to end it. The Cursed Castle. Deep in the misty highlands of Scotland stood Blackthorn Castle, a massive stone fortress perched on a cliff overlooking a dark, raging sea. Abandoned for centuries, the castle was said to be cursed, its halls haunted by vengeful spirits that had once lived within its walls. Local legend told of a noble family, the Ravenscrofts, who had mysteriously vanished one stormy night centuries ago. Rumors whispered of betrayal, dark rituals, and an ancient curse that condemned their souls to eternal torment. Few dared approach the castle, and those who did never returned. One stormy night, a young historian named Evelyn, driven by her fascination with the macabre, arrived in the nearby village. She had spent years researching the Ravenscroft family and believed the castle held answers to the mystery of their disappearance. Undeterred by the villagers' warnings, she ventured to Blackthorn Castle, carrying only a flashlight, a journal, and a camera. The castle loomed ominously as Evelyn approached, its broken turrets silhouetted against a lightning-lit sky. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the sound of crashing waves below added to the eerie atmosphere. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors, which groaned loudly, echoing through the empty halls. Inside, the castle was a labyrinth of shadows and silence. Dust-covered furniture and tattered tapestries hinted at the grandeur it once held. Evelyn's flashlight flickered as she explored, the beam revealing ominous claw marks on the walls and strange symbols carved into the stone. As she entered the great hall, she felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. The air was heavy, and an inexplicable sense of dread filled her. Suddenly, she heard whispers, soft, incoherent, and unnerving. Turning around, she saw nothing but darkness. Ignoring her fear, Evelyn climbed the spiral staircase leading to the master bedroom. There, she discovered an ancient diary, its pages brittle with age. The entries spoke of paranoia, betrayal, and a pact with a dark entity to protect the Ravenscroft legacy. The final entry read, "The price has been paid. We are bound to the darkness forever." As Evelyn read the words aloud, the temperature in the room plummeted. The door slammed shut, and the whispers grew louder, transforming into anguished screams. Shadows in the corners of the room began to move, coalescing into vague, humanoid shapes with glowing red eyes. Evelyn tried to flee, but the shadows blocked her path, their ghostly fingers reaching for her. The diary burst into flames, and the screams turned to laughter, low, guttural, and inhuman. Suddenly, she was no longer in the bedroom but in a dark, endless void. The villagers found her car the next morning, abandoned near the castle. Evelyn was never seen again, but on stormy nights, some claimed to hear her voice echoing from the cliffs, calling for help, trapped, like the Ravenscrofts, in the curse of Blackthorn Castle. The Cursed Castle, Part 2. The villagers whispered that Evelyn had not truly disappeared. She had become part of the curse, her soul trapped within the walls of Blackthorn Castle. But no one dared return to confirm the truth, for fear of sharing her fate. Years later, a weary traveler named Marcus arrived in the village, drawn to the castle by its dark allure. He had heard stories of the Ravenscrofts and the spirits that lingered there. The villagers warned him, but he laughed it off, dismissing the tales as superstition. As Marcus approached Blackthorn Castle, the wind howled through the broken stones. The castle loomed before him like a jagged shadow against the dark sky. He stepped inside, feeling an unnatural cold wrap around him. In the depths of the castle, Marcus found a strange, robed figure standing in the shadows of the great hall. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but its presence radiated an ancient power. The air around him crackled with energy. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking despite his bravado. The figure slowly turned, revealing piercing, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through Marcus's very soul. "I am the one who guards the souls of the Ravenscrofts," the figure whispered, its voice echoing in Marcus's mind. Before Marcus could react, the ground beneath him trembled, and the walls of the castle seemed to shift. The spirits of the Ravenscrofts began to emerge from the shadows, their faces twisted in agony. They reached out to him, whispering his name. Marcus tried to run, but the figure raised a hand, and the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The spirits closed in, their chilling touch freezing him in place. His body was no longer his own. He was bound by the curse, just like Evelyn, just like the Ravenscrofts before him. The last thing Marcus saw was the robed figure, smiling faintly, before darkness consumed him. This part keeps the tension and horror going without much extra detail, focusing on the eerie encounter. Let me know if you need anything else. The Night Walkers of Hollow Hill. In the small, quiet village of Hollow Hill, a strange legend had been passed down through generations. It was said that the villagers were not ordinary people, but cursed souls who, every night, would turn into spirits. The curse had begun long ago, when the village was founded by a group of settlers who had unknowingly disturbed an ancient burial ground. The first night the curse took hold, the villagers awoke to find themselves transformed into shadowy figures, unable to remember who they had been. Every evening, As the sun set and darkness descended, the curse took effect, and they became creatures of the night, wandering spirits, forever trapped in the realm between the living and the dead. The villagers' only chance to remain human was to stay inside their homes before dusk. But those who ventured out would become part of the haunted procession. Sarah, a curious outsider, arrived in Hollow Hill on a foggy evening, drawn by the eerie tales she had heard. She was an investigator, known for uncovering dark secrets and myths. The villagers had warned her to leave, but she was determined to find the truth behind the strange occurrences. That night, she stayed in the only inn in the village, keeping her windows tightly shut, as the locals had advised. However, when the clock struck midnight, she heard a soft knocking on her door. "Who is it?" she called out, her heart pounding. There was no answer, just a long, eerie silence. Hesitantly, she opened the door, only to find the corridor empty, the dim light from the lanterns casting long, twisted shadows. Yet, something felt wrong. Curiosity pushed her forward. She stepped into the village, determined to uncover the truth. As the night air grew colder, she began to hear the faint sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, but saw nothing. Then she saw them, shrouded figures, moving silently through the mist. At first, they appeared to be normal villagers, walking as if in a trance. But as she watched them, she realized their eyes were empty, their movements jerky and unnatural. They had no faces, just shadowy, featureless masks where their heads should be. Terrified, Sarah backed away, but they did not stop. Instead, they turned toward her, their cold, lifeless eyes fixing on her. A voice echoed in her mind. "You should not have come." The figures began to encircle her, their movements growing faster, more frantic. Sarah tried to run, but the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. The road that had once led to the inn was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. She was trapped. Suddenly, the figures started to speak in unison, their voices a distorted, hollow whisper. "Join us, or perish as one of us," they chanted, their voices rising in intensity. As they drew closer, Sarah felt a chill seep into her bones, her breath growing shallow. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The figures reached out with skeletal hands, their touch cold and clammy as they began to pull her into the darkness. Just when she thought she could no longer bear it, a sudden light appeared in the distance. It was the innkeeper, holding a lantern, his face pale with fear. "Come back," he cried, "before it's too late." But Sarah was frozen, her body unable to move as the spirits wrapped their icy fingers around her, pulling her deeper into the shadows. She could see her own reflection in their hollow eyes, a reflection of herself, but distorted, twisted into something unrecognizable. The innkeeper ran forward, but as he did, he was stopped by the sight of the spirits. One by one, the villagers began to reveal their true forms, their faces cracked and decomposed, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, soulless light. They were no longer human. They were the night walkers, forever cursed to roam the village as wraiths, searching for souls to join them in their eternal misery. As Sarah screamed, the spirits began to chant louder, drowning out everything else. And then, in an instant, the world went black. The next morning, the villagers woke to find the streets of Hollow Hill quiet once more. The fog had lifted, the sun had risen, and the curse seemed to have faded. But there was no sign of Sarah. The innkeeper, too, was gone. No one dared speak of what had happened, but every night, as the sun set and the moon rose high, the night walkers would return. They could always sense when a soul had entered their cursed village, and they would rise from the shadows, searching for the next lost wanderer. Some say that Sarah still walks the streets of Hollow Hill, a shadow among shadows, forever lost to the curse. Here's a haunting and terrifying story set in a city with a desolate, abandoned house. The Forgotten House of Ashford City. In the heart of Ashford City stood a house that no one dared to speak of. It was a place of whispers, where the city's most chilling rumors were born. The Ashford House, as it was known, had been abandoned for decades, but its eerie presence loomed over the bustling city like a shadow. The house was surrounded by an old iron fence, its gates rusted shut. Thick vines crawled over its walls, and the windows, covered in grime, offered no glimpse of the inside. No one knew exactly who had lived there, and no one cared to find out. Over the years, the house had become a symbol of death, a place where strange sounds were heard on stormy nights, and where the wind seemed to howl through the empty halls, as though the house itself were alive. Lena, a young journalist, moved to Ashford City with the hope of starting a new life. She had heard the rumors about the house, but like many before her, she was skeptical. She believed in logic and reason, not in ghost stories. But as she walked through the city, she couldn't ignore the pull the house had on her. Every time she passed, she felt a strange chill in the air. It was as if the house was watching her, waiting for something. One evening, curiosity got the best of her. She decided to investigate. Armed with only her camera and a flashlight, Lena ventured to the Ashford house, determined to uncover the truth. As she approached, the gate creaked open, as if inviting her in. Her heart raced, but she pressed on, stepping carefully across the overgrown lawn toward the front door. The air around the house was unnervingly still, the sounds of the city muffled as if the house had its own aura, blocking out the world. Lena's flashlight flickered as she reached the door, and before she could touch the handle, the door slowly creaked open on its own, as if expecting her. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the stench of decay lingered in the air. Her flashlight illuminated the hallway, revealing old portraits on the walls, faces that seemed to follow her with hollow eyes. The house felt cold, far colder than the outside air, and the silence was unnerving. Suddenly, a sound came from upstairs, a soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, but then, driven by the need to prove the rumors wrong, she started up the staircase. Each step creaked under her weight, as if the house were protesting her presence. At the top of the stairs, Lena paused. The door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a shadow moving in the room. She could hear faint whispers, barely audible, but undeniably there. Her breath hitched as she slowly pushed the door open, and what she saw made her freeze in terror. The room was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light, as if the very air itself was glowing. In the center of the room was a grand mirror, its frame covered in intricate, twisted designs. But it wasn't the mirror that caught Lena's attention, it was the figures standing before it. There were at least a dozen of them, all staring at the mirror, their eyes wide and unblinking. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, their faces gaunt and pale, their bodies thin and frail. They didn't move, and yet, Lena could feel their presence, as if they were aware of her every breath. Then, one of them slowly turned toward her. The figure's face was hollow, its eyes empty sockets. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a silent scream that echoed in Lena's mind. She stumbled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but before she could turn to run, the door slammed shut behind her. Trapped in the room, Lena's flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in complete darkness. The whispering voices grew louder, surrounding her, until she felt like they were inside her head. The figures began to move, slowly, their bony hands reaching for her, their empty eyes locked onto hers. One of them spoke in a cold, raspy voice. "You shouldn't have come." The air grew colder, and Lena felt an icy hand grab her arm. She screamed, but no sound escaped. The figures closed in on her, their ghostly fingers sinking into her skin. Panic surged through her, but the more she struggled, the tighter their grip became. Suddenly, everything went black. The next morning, the sun rose over Ashford City, casting a golden glow over the streets. People went about their business, unaware of the terror that had unfolded the night before. But the Ashford house remained, as silent and ominous as ever. Lena was never seen again. Months later, another journalist came to Ashford City, drawn by the same rumors. She walked the streets, hearing whispers of the house, of Lena's disappearance. Curiosity gnawed at her, just as it had with Lena. She approached the house, but before she could touch the gate, it swung open on its own. And so, the cycle continued, for the house had claimed another soul, and it would continue to do so, every time someone dared to uncover its dark secret. This story builds the chilling atmosphere of a haunted house in the middle of a city, with an eerie twist. Let me know if you'd like any changes or more details. Here's the second part of the haunting story, continuing the mystery and terror of the Ashford House. The Forgotten House of Ashford City, Part 2. Months had passed since Lena's disappearance, and Ashford City had resumed its daily life, though something was different now. The whispers of the Ashford house had grown louder, spreading like wildfire among the residents. People who once dared to pass by the house now walked faster, heads down, avoiding its cursed presence. But there was always one who dared to venture too close, and that was how it had always been. In the quietest corner of Ashford City, a journalist named Jack arrived. He had heard the chilling rumors of the house and, like Lena, he was determined to uncover the truth. His colleagues warned him, but Jack was not easily frightened. He believed the house's mysteries were nothing more than stories, exaggerated tales meant to entertain. But as he stood before the towering structure, the feeling that something was terribly wrong weighed on him. The air was colder than usual, the sky overcast, and the very presence of the house made his skin crawl. Despite the unease creeping up his spine, he entered the gates, which creaked open as if expecting him. Jack stepped into the overgrown yard, the ground soft underfoot from years of neglect. The house loomed before him, a monstrous silhouette against the darkening sky. He took a deep breath and entered the front door, which opened with the same groan that Lena had heard. Inside, the house felt alive, as if it were watching him. Dust clung to every surface, the furniture covered in sheets like forgotten relics. The walls, however, held something more, something that Jack couldn't quite explain. Strange symbols, barely visible beneath the layers of grime, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. His flashlight flickered, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move in the shadows. Suddenly, he heard it, a faint sound, distant at first, but growing louder with every step. A soft whispering, like hundreds of voices speaking in unison. The voices were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakably one of malice. Jack's heartbeat quickened as he made his way up the staircase, his flashlight flickering intermittently. Each step felt like an eternity as he reached the top, and he froze in his tracks when he saw it. The door at the end of the hallway was ajar, and through the crack, he could see dim, otherworldly light spilling out. The whispers were now clearer, more urgent. They seemed to beckon him forward, drawing him to the room. With a sense of dread weighing heavily on him, Jack stepped into the room. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. In the center of the room stood the same mirror Lena had seen months ago, its frame now more twisted and grotesque. But it wasn't the mirror that gripped Jack's attention, it was the figures in front of it. They were the same as before, but now there were more of them. Dozens of gaunt, pale faces stared at him from the reflection of the mirror. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their bodies seemed to flicker between solid and translucent, as though they were trapped between worlds. The whispering grew louder, and Jack could see their mouths move, but no sound came from them. They were not just staring at him, they were waiting. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing his flashlight. Darkness enveloped him, and the air grew impossibly cold. Jack fumbled to turn on his flashlight, but it refused to work, as if the house itself were preventing him from seeing. Then, a voice, clear and cold, echoed in his mind. "You should not have come. You are ours now." Jack turned, his eyes desperately searching for a way out. The door was no longer visible. The house had shifted, and the walls closed in. Around him, he could feel the eyes of the figures behind him, their hollow gazes burning into his back. In a blind panic, he stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. The figures moved closer, their limbs twisted and unnatural, their mouths opening in a silent scream. Jack's heart raced as he felt cold hands reach for him, their fingers scraping his skin like ice. Then, in a terrifying instant, the mirror flashed with an unnatural light. Jack's reflection in the mirror was not his own. It was a pale, twisted version of himself, a version with hollow eyes and a twisted smile that was not his. The house groaned, as if it were alive, and the floor beneath Jack's feet seemed to shift. He tried to scream, but his voice was drowned by the cacophony of whispers now filling his ears. They all spoke at once, their voices melding into a deafening roar. "You will never leave. You are one of us." With every ounce of strength he had, Jack turned and bolted for the door. But the hallway was no longer the same. It stretched on endlessly, and no matter how fast he ran, the door seemed to move further away. His breath grew shallow, his legs felt like lead, and the whispers chased him, growing louder and more insistent. Finally, with his body trembling from exhaustion and fear, Jack reached the door. But as he touched the handle, the room fell silent. He turned, expecting to see the figures closing in on him. Instead, the hallway was empty. The door opened, and for a moment, he thought he had escaped. But when he stepped outside, the world had changed. The city was no longer Ashford City. The buildings were crumbling, the streets were empty, and the sky above was a sickly, greenish hue. He turned back, but the Ashford house was gone, replaced by an empty field. The city around him had decayed, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. Jack's reflection still lingered in his mind, the twisted version of himself in the mirror. It was then that he realized, he had never truly escaped. The house had claimed him, just as it had claimed Lena, and now, like all the others before him, he was a part of it. A soul lost to the cursed house, wandering the void, waiting for the next curious soul to arrive. And so, the cycle continued, as it always had. This second part continues to build on the terrifying atmosphere of the Ashford house, expanding on the cursed fate of those who dare to enter. Let me know if you need any more details or further additions. Certainly, here's a combined and enhanced version of all the stories you requested, blending the haunted house and cursed city elements into one chilling narrative. The Cursed House of Ashford City. In the heart of Ashford City stood an old, crumbling mansion that no one dared to enter. The house had been abandoned for decades, yet it cast a dark shadow over the city. It was said to be cursed, and the chilling stories surrounding it had passed from generation to generation. Whispers filled the streets, warning of the house that consumed souls, trapping them within its walls, and leaving nothing but ghosts behind. Lena, a young and determined journalist, arrived in Ashford City, eager to uncover the truth behind the house's dark reputation. She had heard the rumors. The house was not just abandoned, it was alive, haunted by the spirits of those who had entered and never returned. Some said it was a place of death, others claimed it was a prison for lost souls. But Lena wasn't afraid. She had spent her career debunking myths, and she was certain that this, too, could be explained. One foggy evening, she found herself standing before the house. The iron gates creaked open as if inviting her in. With a deep breath, she stepped forward. The house loomed in front of her like a forgotten relic from another time. The windows were dark, their glass cracked, and the door stood ajar, as if waiting for her arrival. As Lena stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence of the house swallowed her whole. The floors creaked beneath her feet as she explored the decaying halls. Dust hung thick in the air, and the faintest smell of decay lingered in the corners. But the most unsettling thing was the portraits on the walls. The eyes of the figures seemed to follow her as she moved, their faces filled with an ancient sorrow. Suddenly, a sound echoed from upstairs, soft, dragging footsteps. Lena's heart raced, but curiosity drove her forward. She climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. At the top of the stairs, she froze. There, at the end of the hallway, was a door slightly ajar, and through the gap, an eerie light spilled into the dark corridor. The whispers began. Lena stepped closer to the door, the voices growing louder, like a distant chant. She pushed it open, her breath shallow. What she saw made her blood run cold. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was twisted, carved with dark, Gothic designs. But it was not the mirror that caught her attention. It was the figures standing before it. There were at least a dozen of them, pale, gaunt figures with hollow eyes, dressed in clothes from an era long past. They were completely still, as if frozen in time. Lena's throat tightened as the figures slowly turned toward her. Their empty eyes locked onto hers, and she felt a chill unlike anything she had ever known. The whispers grew louder, now clear and unmistakable. "Join us, or perish as one of us." A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing Lena's flashlight. She stumbled back, panic rising in her chest, but the door slammed shut behind her. The room grew impossibly cold, and the figures began to move, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out, only the silent scream of something trapped. Lena tried to escape, but the room seemed to shift around her, walls closing in. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, each one growing more desperate, more insistent. And then, through the darkness, a single voice broke through, "You should not have come. You are ours now." Lena's vision blurred, and the world around her began to spin. Her body grew numb as the figures reached out for her, their fingers icy and sharp. She screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The house had claimed her. The next morning, the city of Ashford went on as usual. The sun rose over the streets, casting a golden light across the city. But Lena was gone. No one knew where she had gone, and the house remained standing, silent and still, its curse never broken. Months passed, and another curious soul, a journalist named Jack, arrived in Ashford City, drawn by the same stories that had pulled Lena in. Like her, he was determined to uncover the truth behind the haunted house. Despite the warnings from the locals, Jack entered the cursed mansion one fateful night. The house greeted him with the same eerie silence. The door creaked open as if expecting him. The air was thick with dust, and the oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to swallow him whole as he explored its decaying halls. Jack, however, was not as easily frightened. He moved deeper into the house, convinced it was nothing more than an old building with a dark past. But then, the whispers began. Soft at first, like a distant murmur, the voices grew louder, more insistent. Jack's flashlight flickered, and he felt an unnatural cold as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. At the top of the stairs, he saw the door to the same room Lena had entered months before. The room was bathed in an eerie light. The figures stood there, motionless, their hollow eyes staring at him as though they had been waiting for him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. His heart raced, but his legs refused to move. He could feel the pull of the mirror, the strange energy that seemed to emanate from it. As he stepped closer, the door slammed shut behind him, and the room seemed to grow darker. The figures turned toward him, their bodies flickering between solid and translucent. The air grew colder, and Jack could feel the weight of the house pressing in on him. The whispers grew louder, now deafening, drowning out all other sounds. Jack reached for the door, but it was too late. The figures closed in on him, their bony hands reaching for him, their mouths opening in silent screams. The coldness overwhelmed him, and before he could even scream, his body went numb. The next day, Ashford City went on as usual, unaware that Jack had vanished. The house stood silent, waiting for the next curious soul to enter. And so, the cycle continued. The cursed house of Ashford City was never truly abandoned. It waited, ever hungry, for the next wanderer to fall under its dark spell. This combined version blends the eerie presence of the haunted house with the cursed city and its long history of capturing souls, creating a gripping and chilling tale that grows more terrifying as it progresses. Let me know if you'd like further modifications. Here's a new chilling story about three friends who turn into ghosts after a truck accident. The Haunting of Ashford Road. Three friends, Ryan, Alex, and Sarah, had been inseparable since childhood. They grew up in the small town of Ashford, a place where everyone knew everyone's business, and the roads were always quiet, especially after dark. One late summer evening, they decided to take a road trip to a nearby town, wanting to relive the carefree days of their youth. The journey was supposed to be a fun one, filled with laughter and good memories. They were driving along the old Ashford Road, a stretch of highway that had long been rumored to be cursed. Locals spoke of eerie happenings along the road, disappearing vehicles, mysterious figures in the distance, and the occasional unsettling scream that could be heard in the dead of night. But the friends, skeptical and fearless, brushed off the tales as nothing more than superstition. As they drove, the night grew darker, the fog creeping in thicker with every mile. The air felt strangely heavy, and the once cheerful conversation between the friends began to quiet. The headlights of the car flickered, and the radio, which had been playing their favorite tunes, suddenly turned to static. "I don't like this," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's too quiet out here." Ryan laughed nervously. "Don't worry, it's just a road. Maybe it's the fog messing with the lights." But even Alex, usually the most daring of the group, felt uneasy. "Let's just get through this stretch, okay? We'll be fine." They barely noticed the truck that appeared in the distance, its headlights blinding and its engine roaring like a beast. The truck swerved sharply, and before any of them could react, the driver lost control. The vehicle crashed into their car, throwing them off the road. The impact was deafening, and the world went black. When Ryan, Alex, and Sarah woke up, they were no longer in the car. The sounds of the night, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, were replaced by an eerie silence. The friends tried to move, but their bodies felt strangely light, almost weightless. It was as if they were floating. "Where are we?" Ryan asked, his voice shaky. They looked around. The fog had thickened even more, and the road stretched out endlessly in front of them. The once familiar surroundings of Ashford Road now seemed distant and foreign, as if they had crossed over to another world entirely. Is this real?" Alex murmured. His eyes widened in terror. "We should be dead, right? We should be." Before Sarah could say anything, they saw it, a figure standing in the distance, cloaked in shadow, slowly moving toward them. The figure was tall, hunched, and its eyes glowed an unnatural red. It was the last thing they remembered before everything went dark again. When they woke up once more, they were back on Ashford Road, but something was different. The world around them felt empty, distorted. The fog had a strange heaviness, and the air smelled of decay. When they looked at each other, their reflections were not their own. "I can't see myself," Sarah whispered, trembling. Ryan reached for his reflection in the side mirror, but his hand went right through it. "Something's wrong," he said, panic rising in his voice. We're not alive anymore, are we?" Alex's voice cracked. "We're dead, aren't we?" The realization hit them like a freight train. They were ghosts, trapped in the place where they had died. The truck had killed them, but their spirits had not moved on. They had been bound to Ashford Road, unable to escape. As they tried to make sense of their new reality, the figure they had seen earlier appeared again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It was a grotesque creature, with pale skin stretched tightly over a skeletal frame. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth was open wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It grinned, revealing a deep hunger. "You shouldn't have come here," it rasped, its voice echoing in their minds. "This road is cursed. Souls who die here never leave." The friends tried to run, but they could not move. Their feet remained rooted to the ground, as if invisible chains had bound them in place. "Please," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her ghostly face. "We didn't mean to die here. We didn't ask for this." But the creature merely smiled, its eyes narrowing. "You didn't choose this, but you're mine now. All who die here belong to me, trapped for eternity." The creature raised its hand, and the fog swirled around them, pulling them toward the dark depths of Ashford Road. Their forms flickered and began to fade, as if the road itself was trying to swallow them whole. For what seemed like hours, they were dragged through the endless fog, unable to escape, unable to make peace with their fate. Time no longer mattered. They were no longer people. They were shadows, mere echoes of the lives they had once lived. To this day, Ashford Road remains a place of legend. People who pass through that stretch of highway at night often speak of strange happenings, the faint sound of laughter in the distance, the flicker of car headlights that never seem to stop, and the ghostly figures that appear at the side of the road, pleading for help. But no one dares to stop, for they know the truth. Ryan, Alex, and Sarah are still there, bound to the road for all eternity, their souls trapped by the curse that claimed them. And the creature, ever watchful, waits for the next traveler to wander too far. This story blends elements of friendship, a tragic accident, and the horror of being trapped in an otherworldly limbo, haunting a cursed road. Let me know if you'd like to adjust any details or add more twisted. Here's a final story combining all the elements from the previous tales, incorporating ghosts, cursed places, and eerie mysteries. This story will blend the chilling atmosphere of haunted houses, cursed roads, and trapped souls into one terrifying narrative. The Shadows of Ashford. In the small, quiet town of Ashford, there were rumors that had plagued the area for generations. People spoke in hushed tones about the Ashford House, an old, decaying mansion at the edge of the town. It had been abandoned for years, but no one dared to approach it. The house was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had entered and never returned. But it wasn't just the house that was cursed. Ashford itself seemed to be under the grip of an ancient, malevolent force. Ryan, Alex, and Sarah, 3 childhood friends, had grown up in the town. They were fearless, always seeking adventure and challenging the stories that had terrified the town for as long as they could remember. But one fateful night, the 3 of them decided to explore the old Ashford house, seeking to uncover the truth about its dark history. The air was thick with fog as they made their way to the house, and the night felt strangely quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. The house loomed before them, its windows like dark eyes, watching their every move. Despite the eerie feeling, they pushed forward, entering the mansion through its rotting door, which creaked loudly as it swung open. Inside, the house was dark, the air stale, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. But it wasn't just the house that felt wrong, it was the weight in the air, the sense of being watched. As they ventured deeper, they came across an old, cracked mirror in the hallway, its frame twisted with strange symbols. They didn't notice the figure standing in the shadows, but as they passed the mirror, the figures within it began to stir. The reflection showed them not as they were now, but twisted versions of themselves, pale, with hollow eyes, trapped in the mirror. Before they could react, the room seemed to change. The walls shifted, the floor beneath them trembled, and the door slammed shut. The friends tried to escape, but they found themselves trapped in a different dimension, a place where time no longer existed, and the line between life and death was blurred. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open, and they found themselves transported to Ashford Road, a stretch of highway known for its eerie reputation. This road, like the house, was cursed, rumored to claim the lives of those who passed through it. The 3 friends were no longer alive, they were spirits, trapped in this in-between world, unable to move on. The figure that had haunted the house now appeared before them again. It was a dark, monstrous entity, its eyes glowing a blood-red hue. "You should never have come," it growled, its voice echoing in their minds. "This place is mine, all who wander here belong to me." The friends tried to escape, but they found themselves bound to the road, unable to move or speak. The world around them twisted further, their surroundings shifting in a surreal dance of fog, shadows, and distorted visions of the life they once knew. They tried to scream, but their voices were lost in the endless fog. The creature smiled, a horrific grin that stretched impossibly wide. "You are mine now," it hissed. "Forever bound to the house, to the road, to this curse. You will never escape." The friends realized the horrifying truth. They had become part of the curse. Their souls were trapped in the haunted house and on Ashford Road, doomed to wander forever in search of something they could never find, peace. The house had claimed them, and now the road would keep them, lost in the fog, waiting for the next soul to cross its path. The story of Ryan, Alex, and Sarah became a whispered legend in Ashford. People would pass by Ashford House and Ashford Road at night, hearing whispers in the fog, the soft sounds of laughter and footsteps in the distance, or the occasional faint cry for help. But no one ever stopped, and so, the cycle continued. The cursed house, the haunted road, and the souls trapped within them waited, forever haunted by the shadows of their pasts, their screams echoing through the fog, and their memories fading into the darkness. This final story brings together the haunting themes of cursed places, trapped souls, and the malevolent forces that bind them. The spirits of the 3 friends are now part of the very curse they sought to understand, their fates sealed in the darkness of Ashford. Let me know if you need any further changes or additions.